Kerrie from Living in Loveliness, and today I'm going to show you how to sew this really fast Linda Lotus bag. You can see just how beautiful it is. You've got your little petals on the side, and when you open it up it almost sits flat, so you can see all of your collections inside, whether you've got your sewing embellishments in there or whether you've got your makeup in there. The thing that I love about this particular project is it's made from using 2 squares, so a really fast tutorial for you today. And you can find this pattern in issue 2 of my Fabulously Fast Fat Quarter Fun. The templates are in there and the step-by-step instructions are in there as well. So let me show you just how easy and how fast this project is. So first of all, you're going to start with, and you can do this with any size, but these are 15.5-inch squares. You can reduce or increase if you want smaller or larger bags. So I've got 2 beautiful Riley Blake fabrics to sew with today. I've got a nice pink for the lining, and then I've got this beautiful floral, let's get it the right way, for the outer side of the fabric. So to make this bag, it's incredibly simple. What we're going to do is have any one, it doesn't matter which one, any one of the pretty patterns, so pattern facing you when it's laid flat on your table, and then we're popping the next piece of fabric pattern facing on top, so you can see the wrong side when this is flat on your table. So make sure all of these fabrics are lining up. So all of your raw edges are lining up. And what we're going to do is just pop some pins into there. Now, whenever I sew a project using my pins, I always use the pins as arrows. So what I'm going to do is point these towards the seams that I'm sewing. And actually, other than our turning gap, which we'll mark up in a moment, we're going to sew the whole way around this square. So we're sliding in our pins, just pointing to the outer raw edge. And the reason I find this so useful is if you've got a different workstation to your sewing table and you're making quite a lot of projects at the same time, by sliding your pins in, when you return to your sewing machine, you know exactly where you're sewing on here. So we're just sliding pins in, pointing to each side. And we want to mark up on here. We don't need a huge turning gap because we've got no interfacing or any stabilizer in here. So using a ruler, what we're going to do is just mark up a 3-inch turning gap. Always avoid putting your turning gaps on the corners because it just puts a little bit too much pressure on the corners of your fabric. So we're now just going to mark up a 3-inch turning gap. And we'll just pop those out of the way for now. And just using a straight stitch and a 1/4-inch seam allowance. If you're unsure what your seam allowance is, then what we want to do is just line the raw edge of the fabric up with the side of your sewing machine foot. And we want to make sure that we're on a straight stitch. So we start by reverse stitching back to that line that we've just drawn. We sew into the corner of our fabric. Just unhook your cotton if it's caught up. Sew into the corner of the fabric. To turn your corner and to get a nice point on your corner, we're going to drop the needle, pivot the fabric, and make sure we're lining back up with the side of our machine foot. If you're not, you can raise that needle, lift your foot and move your fabric. So we're back in line with there. So we're sewing along using a 1/4-inch seam allowance on all 4 sides. Drop your needle and then pivot your fabric. And we're repeating that until we get back to that 2nd pen mark where we're going to reverse stitch again. And the reason that we're reverse stitching is to make sure we're not putting any pressure on that seam when we're turning our project inside out. So again, down to that corner. You'll notice that I'm not removing my pins, and that really is because I always leave the pins a good 1/4-inch away. So it means when I'm sewing, I'm not coming into contact with those pins. So I can see that blue line approaching. We're just going to reverse stitch to finish. And just trim your threads as you go. So as I said just about the pin lines, you'll notice that naturally I always tend to put mine a good thumb space back. It's holding the fabric in place, so it's doing the job that I want it to. And just trimming away those extra cottons. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to clip the corners. You'll notice that mine doesn't quite match up there. There's been a little bit of movement, perhaps before I pop the pins in, but it's not going to make the world of difference really on this project. So now we're trimming into the corner, and this just means that when we reverse this in a little while, we'll get a nice point on our fabric. So we're just trimming only for about 1/2 inch, so just at an angle. And you can see there that we get nice and close to that stitch line. Just make sure you're not cutting into that actual stitch line, because we don't want that to come open when we reverse stitch this in a moment. And again, the same on there as well. I'm just angling the scissors and just getting a nice finish on there. So we're going to find our turning gap, and whenever I turn a project, I poke my fingers to the furthest point, pinch that fabric, so I've got my fingers on there, pinching the fabric, and as I tease that, as I bring that out, you'll notice that that furthest corner now is popping through the hole. As we tease this out, there isn't any batting or any stabiliser, so that will just slide out of that hole nice and easily actually. So we've now got this project turned the right way. So first of all, we're going to follow this around, just poke our fingers into the corner, push the corners out, and then to get a nice finish on there, we'll use the tip of our scissors, being careful not to poke through the fabric. And if you do slip and poke through the fabric, which I know I've done in the past, then you can just pop round and you can just sew that up at your leisure. But just slowly roll your fabric on the scissor tip rather than actually physically pushing through that hole. And because we've trimmed that down, it means that there's not going to be much bulk and you'll get a nice finish, which is really important on the project that we're doing for those petals. So what we're going to do is just press this now just to get a nice finish on this project. Because what you'll find is that when you're reversing your project, actually what happens is you get all these creases because you've pulled it through that little turning gap. So just make sure we're pushing those fabrics and pressing them. So where I've got my turning gap here, you'll notice that naturally, because of your 1/4 inch seam allowance, your seam sits on the inside, and that's really important at this stage. So we want our seam sitting just there on the inside. Now, because I tend to always use a zigzag stitch to finish things, I'm not going to worry about hand stitching that hole, but of course you could if you wanted to finish this with a straight stitch. If you've got any folds in the fabric like I have, this is quite thick fabric, just make sure we're pushing those out so we're getting that nice press seam there. And take away, at this stage, take away all your creases in your project. And just flip this over and make sure we've pressed that on there on the back as well. Absolutely love this fabric. I think actually I'm going to give this to my mum. Her favourite colour's green, so I might fill this with some little sewing notions actually, and give it to my mum perhaps for Mother's Day. So what we're going to do again now is follow around on there, and we're going to pin back through those layers. Now I'm going to cheat, and I'm not going to pin all the way around, mainly because there isn't any bulk in here, there isn't any stabiliser, but I am definitely going to pin through where my turning gap is, just to make sure when I come into contact with it, when it's on the machine, I remember that I'm sewing across the turning gap, and then I'm really careful, especially when I'm sewing there. So let's just pop that out of the way. So as I said, we're going to use a zigzag stitch on here. You could of course use any of your beautiful stitches that your machine has, or you could of course just start with your straight stitch. I'm using a contrasting thread so you'll be able to see my stitch line, and I'm avoiding starting at the turning gap as well. So I always start in the middle of the project, avoiding the corners, and I never start at the turning gap. And we're lining the foot up as we did the first time around. This time we're doing a zigzag stitch, and we're lining the foot up on the corner and repeating exactly the same as what we did. So stopping when you get to the corner, making sure your needle's in your fabric and pivoting. And you can see that beautiful stitch, not so much on the green, but it looks absolutely beautiful on the pink, which in a little while is going to be our petal for the bag. So the pins now are very close to the raw edge. So this time I'm going to slow down and sew slowly. That was a tongueful, a mouthful even. Perhaps not that slow. So I'm slowing down so I can remove those pins, and because I want a nice finish on there, and just taking our time on the turning gap means we haven't got to worry about unstitching this if we're not happy with our turning gap. So let's speed that back up and sew to the next corner. Sure, you can see this beautiful thread showing, complementing the lovely pink fabric that we've got here. So again, we're getting to the corner, drop your needle and pivot. Again, as I said, if you're not in line with the edge of your fabric, you can just manually lift your needle and move that across. The reason that I love working with a zigzag stitch, and you'll hear me say this time and time again, is you haven't got to worry about being absolutely perfect. It doesn't show as much when you're using a straight line if you've got a little bit of a wiggle in your line, especially if you're newer to sewing, or if you're like me, you forget to make things in time. So this is a great way to speed through your projects as well, and I'm sure you'll agree it's got a beautiful decorative finish on this project. It actually looks lovely with this colour pink, this cotton. So we're just on that last corner now, slowing down as we get to the corner, manually popping our needle in, not quite in line, so I'm going to raise the needle, drop the foot so it's in line with the edge of the fabric. And just because I'm coming down towards this line, this first stitch line here, I'm going to make sure I take away this cotton just to prevent that from knotting up when I'm sewing across there in a little while. So again, when you're coming back to meet where you started with your zigzag stitch, just start to slow down. Do that with your machine if it allows it. And if you've got any crossover on your zigzag stitch, which you normally find you have, you can just undo the last few stitches, if you want to, of course, so there's no crossover on there. So the next thing that we're going to do, so simply all we've done is sewn these two pieces of fabric and we've put a nice decorative stitch on that square of fabric. Now this is what makes this a really, really lovely fast project. So what we want to do now is we're going to, so the fabric that you want on the inside, this is really important, is the fabric that's facing you at this stage. So what we need to do now is the fabric that you want on the outer part of your bag. So on this one I've got the pink, but this time I want the green fabric. We now want that pattern facing you. So you should be able to see that fabric that you want on the outside. And what we're doing is we're going to mark 4 inches from the corner. So using your ruler, we're sitting the ruler in line with a 4-inch line on the edge of your fabric, and we're just going to mark on each corner now. So we can just simply leave the ruler in place and turn the fabric to us. So we're marking 4 inches from each corner. So just keep bringing the fabric to you, make life easy for yourself, keep bringing the fabric to you. 4 inches from that corner, and we're just popping a little pen mark. Now the pen that I'm using is a heat erasable pen, so it means when I press this to complete my project, it will remove that line. So we haven't got to worry about that. So 4 inches from the edge of your fabric. And it's important that we mark that up on each corner, on each side of the fabric. And this really is only giving us what's going to now turn and become our petal and expose that beautiful lining on the inside of your bag. So sometimes I tend to work with plainer fabrics for the lining of my bag, but something like this, you know, you really want to showcase that beautiful fabric. So where we had those pen lines, now what we're doing is folding those back, and we're just going to press on each of those. And what we'll do is we'll just slide a little pin in And again, using this as our arrow, because this is the section we're going to sew in a little while, and we're going to repeat that now on each corner. So we're folding those back and just sliding a pin in. So we're sliding a pin towards the area that we're sewing, which is this section in a moment. And again, so we're just now repeating that on each corner. And I'm sure you'll agree, having that beautiful decorative stitch really adds to the look of the bag as well. I think we find that we tend to always stick to a straight stitch and not use those lovely stitches. So at every opportunity, although I generally tend to stick with a zigzag stitch, and that it really is because most machines have them, so it's nice to see what it looks like with a zigzag, but we often forget to use those beautiful stitches. Now, because I've applied heat to this project, that will have removed those pen lines on there as well. So using a slightly longer ruler, what we want to do is we're now going to draw around the whole outer shape, and we're going to draw 3/4 inches down. Now yours might change dependent upon the ribbon that you're using. This one actually is still 3/4 down, and you can see this ribbon's a little bit thicker. But if you wanted, you know, really make sure, dependent upon the ribbon you're using, you take that into consideration. It's not a problem to increase that stitch line, but I'm using 3/4 inches. So just using my ruler, I'm lining the ruler up on, so it's on the folded edge, and we're 3/4 inches in, and I'm drawing along each side. Now what you will notice when you're drawing this is those points don't quite line up. So when we draw this second line, you'll notice that it doesn't quite line up here. So that's why we continue that line all the way across. And again, turning that towards us, and you can see each time it slightly overhangs on this particular pattern, and we're turning this each step of the way 3/4 inches. So it is important that we're sewing even where we haven't got these folds. So this line that we're drawing now is simply going to create us that stitch line. And you could absolutely do this without your pen and your ruler, and you could guess it if you wanted to. If you're confident at sewing, you could absolutely do that. But even though I do a lot of sewing, I still like to draw my lines because I just feel that this encourages me to stick to it, but also I get a nice finish and I know it's accurate as well. But of course, if you haven't got the equipment, then you can just guess this by using a measurement on your sewing machine. So now we've now drawn a line 3/4, so the 3/4 inch line is sitting just here, and we've drawn that all the way around. And we're going to sit on the machine, sit it back on the machine. We're not sitting on the machine, and we're starting sewing from here. And this time we're using a straight stitch. So return your stitch to a straight stitch on your machine, and we're simply now lining that pen line up on our fabric, ensuring that the middle of our sewing machine foot is sitting on that line, and we're going to sew the whole way around using a straight stitch. So when you get to your pen mark where it's telling you to turn exactly the same as you did, just drop your needle in and pivot. And what we're actually doing now, this line that we're sewing now, is creating our channel for our drawstring in a little while. Of course, if you've got slimmer ribbon to work with, you could make this a little slimmer on your channel, but I think this works quite nice actually on most thicknesses of ribbon. Let's just speed that up. So sewing along each side along that pen mark until you get back to the point where you started. If you're more confident on a machine, then you probably won't find that you're stopping to turn. You'll just continue to turn as you go around, and again, that's absolutely fine. But for the tutorial, let me just remind you, drop your needle in. When you're approaching where you've started sewing, it's important that you just trim away any of those excess threads. And just make sure you come a little further than that start point where you started your sewing, and just trim away your extra cotton. So now we've got, so these little gaps in here is what's creating our channel for our drawstring. And what we're going to do, using a safety pin, if I can find mine, that's attached to the magnet, is just pop the safety pin through your ribbon. So it's important that you pop your safety pin through your ribbon and just anchor that on there. Now the length of this ribbon, let me just remind myself because I can't remember off the top of my head. We've got 28 inches there on this ribbon. So anything more than that is fine. You'll have extra tails on the edge and just mean that you can have the bag sitting flatter if you wish. So I've just attached the safety pin onto the end of the ribbon. There's nothing on the end, so be careful to keep this in place. Now what we're going to do is we've got two pieces of ribbon. We want to sit one piece of ribbon to the left and one to the right if you like, and we're threading the ribbon starting here on the right all the way around until the second tail comes out on the right, and then with the second piece of ribbon we'll leave one of the tails hanging out to the left and thread it all the way around until the tail comes out to the right. And what that does when we pull that together, it just means we've got a ribbon either side of our project. So we're now sliding this through, and there isn't far to go through here, so just pinching that through this little channel. You'll notice it's got nowhere to go, so it'll just slide across, and then we're going to bring this through the other side as well. What I'm quickly going to do, which I've not done, is just take these lines off, these pen lines now. So at this point, or before we even start threading our ribbon, we just want to take those pen marks just off there because it's very tricky afterwards. So we're just taking those, just by applying the heat or a little bit of friction, that'll remove those pen marks, which we don't want on the finished bag, especially if we're gifting it. Okay, so we're through the second little triangle if you like, but there are petals, and now we're coming through the third one. So at this point what you'll notice is the other end of the ribbon will start to come through if you're not careful. So as you bring it through, just hold on to this piece of ribbon so it's not going to slide through, and bring this back through. Just make sure it's the right way out. And you can see already we've got this beautiful bag. So just pull this through now, remove your safety pin, pinch the two ends of your ribbon together and just knot those off, just a single knot. You could put some little embellishments on here, some beads. They look beautiful with beads actually, some beads on there or some bells. And you can see now if you were just to put one piece of ribbon on, this is what happens to the side of your bag. So that's why we do that second channel. So it's important that they're on two opposite sides. So again, just push your safety pin through the end of your ribbon, and this is on our right where we started, so we're now starting on the left. And just remembering where we started. We tend to get through the first two petals, and then we'll notice that we need to just catch hold of that ribbon end so it doesn't start pulling all the way through. You can of course use longer ribbon if you wanted to, but I quite like when it's closed up, when it's open. I'll show you that in just a moment. So I can see where this tail is, I've still got hold of it, and I'm going through that final little petal there, pulling that through, and already you can see this beautiful bag coming together. These fabrics are beautiful to work with. And they're very sturdy as well. So we've now got that, that's coming back out, so you can see we've got this, just a little reminder, this little tie on the right, and we want this little tie here on the left. And we're going to wrap that around and just knot that off. Again, you could put your bells, ribbons, trims, anything you wanted to on here. They're lovely with bells actually, it's always nice to hear bells on projects. And then of course you can see our bag. So mine, I quite like mine to sit so it's still quite close, so not everything's falling out and it captures, but I can still access what's in that bag. And then when you've finished, you could put toggles on here as well if you wanted to, but as you pull this together, we have this really beautiful, so let me just pop those out for you to see, beautiful Linda, I've called her Linda, I think she's cute with the name Linda, Lotus bag that is perfect now for all your little projects to go in there. I think this one I'm going to fill with some lovely notions and give it to my mum for Mother's Day. But you can fill yours with anything. They make great makeup bags and they are a lovely gift to give full of lovely projects. Thank you very much for watching the tutorial.